Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it is coffee time. Today we're going over something about vaccines. First, I'll call your attention to the patriarchy card on display. It gives me authority to comment on all things feminism, and I've taken liberty to comment on this coronavirus, as it also relates to carryings on in the world, especially the creation of one world government, in which feminism plays a huge role, as I described in the video, One World Government and the Role of Feminism. Okay, let's get on to vaccines and stuff today. This idea for this topic came to me when I saw a tweet by a fellow, I forget his name, I think I have this tweet screen capped, and he said, rejecting this vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, or any one of the number of them, does not mean you're an anti-vaxxer, and it doesn't, because people are, I guess I should say intelligent people, are able to make intelligent decisions about particular vaccines, and they're all different. And the risks of the given diseases are all different. So let's jump into some of the material here. Well, I guess first I'll recognize some of the regulars here. Pedro's here. Ryan R. Tamjan San. I don't remember that name, but probably it's me that I haven't noticed it before. Welcome to the show. Let's jump right into what's going on with vaccines. At first, I want to go over some of the the pressure and the enthusiasm that's mounting around the world and within the citizenry of the world to bring about a vaccine passport. This amounts to a health passport, without which you are, or you can be, severely limited in your ability to travel about the world and meet your own needs, as I've discussed in previous videos. Let me take a sip of my coffee here. I hope you have a beverage ready to enjoy as we go through this show, because this, like all of our shows here, we question the status quo. We question the narrative being pumped at us by those in power, because those in power always have an ulterior motive. That's a safe thing to say. There may be exceptions to that. There may be the leader, an odd leader here or there that comes out with the best interest of their people at heart, but that doesn't mean they're right either. Even people with the best interests, your best interests in heart, can be wrong and cause you pain, misery, suffering, and death. So, it is always prudent to question the narrative being pumped at you, especially when the people doing the pumping have something to gain if you believe their version of the story. So, 5 things you to know about vaccine passports, and this is coming from the Smithsonian. Reading the subtitle, as travelers venture out, countries and states are experimenting with forms of documentation that show proof of COVID-19 vaccination. Let's check a couple of quotes from, read a couple of quotes from this. This is Smithsonian Magazine. Reading from the top with me. These moves could be a lifeline for the struggling tourism industry, which is estimating more than $1 trillion in losses due to COVID-19. Tourism and travel have taken such huge hits due to the coronavirus, but it's no surprise that the airline industry is rallying behind the vaccine passport idea. Here again, even from so-called prestigious magazines like the Smithsonian, they are confusing the issue. The coronavirus, let's say it's here, it's taken such huge hits due to the coronavirus. No, I can't even say this enough times, although we've said it a lot. Nothing took a hit economically from the coronavirus. The hits from the economy were all due to decisions made by those in power who often, and in this case almost always, have ulterior motives for their decisions. The lifeline for the struggling tourism industry is today what it should have been over a year ago from the beginning, is don't lock down the economy of the world. Don't imprison people in their homes against their will. Don't keep them out of their workplace. And we're going to get into the details of this in some of the reports and letters coming out from groups of the medical community talking about not only the wrongness of lockdowns, the ineffectiveness of lockdowns on treating a virus like this, which, by the way, we talked about in no uncertain terms from the very beginning. The first weeks of this coronavirus, we were criticizing this idea of locking down cultures. And you guys know the theme here. We should have been putting all our resources into protecting those at risk. The elderly and those with multiple or other confounding health issues. We didn't. We punished the entire world from newborn babies to the elderly. If we had let the economy chug along as normal, allowing people with zero risk for the coronavirus to keep working and pumping the economy, we would have had hundreds of times more resources to put towards protecting those who are actually at risk. And that includes allowing the tourist industry to carry on as per normal, with the exception of those at risk and possibly those proven, tested to have the virus. But no, we didn't do that. We locked down. We didn't. The tyrants who used emergency laws for enabling them to take emergency powers, those tyrants took emergency powers on the excuse of this and punished the entire world. Let's move on. I've got a few to cover here. I could talk on this for a long time. This is a real frustration to me, as it should be to everybody who values their freedom and their life as an individual in this world. Because this time, more than any other in my lifetime, possibly in the history of the planet, there's never been such a broad, widespread, intense effort to eliminate rights and freedoms for the regular people. Reading from the top. However, vaccine passports aren't just being proposed for travel. We talked about this a year ago. They start like that, a temporary measure or just restricted for travel purposes, but these programs always expand and reduce your liberties, your freedoms, your rights. They may be used as a green light for the vaccinated to attend concerts or go to see a favorite team play, while the unvaccinated are kept out. Israel, and therefore, just think about that. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is an experimental vaccine with unknown effects, and we're going to get into the details of the concerns from a large group of doctors who are now becoming outspoken about it. You are being restricted from carrying on your life because you refuse to be a guinea pig to an experimental, untested vaccine that could have untold risks for you personally. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that people are wanting it. Let's read on. Israel, the country with the fastest vaccination rollout, has already created a green pass that gives special privileges and access to its vaccinated citizens, and expect this to be the norm. We've been pushed down a slippery slope here, and with the masses of people crying out for this on the false presumption that we need to have a vaccine passport in order to frickin' well travel is ridiculous. This surely, inevitably leads to the reduction, the elimination of rights and freedoms for regular citizens. In fact, if you think about it, these kinds of health passports and passports of various pernicious passports are the subject of almost every dystopian science fiction movie, with good reason, because they're a bad idea. Let's carry on. As more venues open up to people with proof of vaccination, health experts hope that the lure of a vaccine passport could result in more people stepping forward to get vaccinated. This is the carrot. They punish you. Then they say you can avoid this punishment if you only accept to be a guinea pig in the world's largest experimental drug research program. Nothing like this has ever even been proposed in the world, to vaccinate the entire world with experimental, untested drugs. This is absolutely insane, and it has to stop. And it won't stop unless regular people all around the world get really vocal about it and more. Because those in power fully intend to flex their muscles all the way to your slavery, your enslavement. That could be they continue on, that could be an important way for the U.S. to fight vaccine hesitancy. Why do they assume the U.S. or anyone else needs to fight vaccine hesitancy? Have you all lost your minds out there writing this crap? Have you not realized, it's open knowledge that these vaccines are not tested and they've only been given approval on the basis that we're facing an emergency, which we are not, which was fake. We are facing a virus that affects a known population primarily, the elderly. And instead of protecting the elderly, we are imprisoning the healthy and the normal. These are warning bells should be going off in everybody's head, everywhere in the world. And yet, like lemmings, the majority are just following right along off the cliff. Let's read on. Vaccinations and the vaccine passports may even become mandatory. Remember, these things never stay still. When you create a program like this, I guarantee you it, and you all know it in your hearts. I know I'm preaching to people who already understand this stuff, but I get it off my chest, and it does help me when I talk about it. You know in your hearts that it's not going to stop at the vaccine passport. It's not going to stop at travel. This is going to be a creeping loss of freedoms everywhere in the world. Here they say, we've been hearing about workplaces that are introducing ideas that they make it mandatory. We haven't even got the vaccine passport yet, folks, and they're already talking about making it mandatory in the workplace. They haven't even arrived yet. Imagine after people get used to the idea of vaccine passports being acceptable, imagine what they'll be talking about then. I guarantee it will never stop. It's a creeping control over your lives. Reading onwards. While vaccine passports sound like one way to open the world back up, some health experts don't see vaccination as a green light for travel just yet. Watch their reasoning for this. A vaccine passport is not a free pass to not use protection or let your guard down, says Ching Hong. Given that no vaccine is 100% effective while COVID is going around, a vaccine just becomes one important strategy in which we can protect ourselves, but not the only measure. In other words, you're still going to have to social distance. You're still going to be subject to random lockdowns in your home. You're still going to be able to have forced to put on a face diaper. All of this is the dehumanization of human beings and elimination of their freedoms for control by the elite. Last month, reading onwards, the World Health Organization, that famous organization that's at the center of so much controversy, released a statement urging countries away from vaccine passports, pointing out that, quote, there are still critical unknowns regarding the efficacy of vaccination in reducing transmission. Then why are you pushing it all the way around the world? Because there are even bigger concerns that this thing is going to cause health problems. And you're the World Health Organization, and you are the dumbest when it comes to the world health. Why? Because you're political. You're a political pawn in the hands of the Bill Gateses of the world. You have no more legitimacy. You've lied so much and so deeply and so dangerously that you should be run off the planet. Let's read on. There are still critical unknowns. Limited availability of vaccines. You're concerned about limited availability of vaccines that don't do the job and that aren't proven. All of this just amounts to the fact that you're worried, the elite are worried, that vaccine passports will be used to let the work slave population, the work slave group, get back to a normal life. They don't want that. They're opening their eyes now to the idea that people will be using this and trying to argue that a vaccine passport gives them freedom again. They don't want the work slave population to have freedom again. The point of all this is to eliminate your freedoms, little bit by little bit, but the faster the better for them. Let's move on. As you can tell, this kind of stuff gets me wound up, because throwing away your freedoms should not be done lightly. This is far more dangerous than a vaccine. Far more dangerous. We have been through periods of the elite ruling viciously over masses of work slaves through history. We do not want to go back there. You'd much rather face a plague of viruses than face a plague of the ruling elite treating you like a slave. Far more dangerous. Read onwards with me, if you will, from the top here. Despite those concerns, it's likely some form of vaccine passport is coming. Despite these concerns. They're going to iron out this little problem that the vaccine passport might give you some form of freedom. They're going to iron that little problem out. One of President Joe Biden's early executive orders directed government agencies to, quote, assess the feasibility of digitizing COVID-19 vaccination records, most likely in some form of public-private partnership. Creeping government control over your lives. If we don't stand up to this now, and what disturbs me the most is that there's not that much evidence that enough people are willing to stand up to this. People are so eager to end these lockdowns that they're willing to accept a permanent device to control your freedom of travel. Permanent. Those health passports will only be the foot in the door, and they will be used to restrict and control everything you do in your life. This is the creeping tyranny of our age. Reading from the top. People are so eager to travel again, though, that they may be willing to jump those hurdles. A recent study from travel news site The Vacationer found that a whopping 73.6% of Americans surveyed would use a COVID health passport or app just to be able to hop on an international flight again. Damn lights keep jumping up and down because the electricity here isn't stable. So it blasted me in the eye there. Just to hop on an international flight again. If I was a suspicious man or a gambling man, I'd bet that they predicted this, and that's one of the reasons they put the lockdowns on, to get you to accept what they've always wanted. For decades they've been trying to push these kinds of control measures through the population. Now they lock you into your house and they say, well, you can only come out after you accept the COVID vaccine passport, the major tracking mechanism that will be expanded and expanded and expanded ad infinitum. So here BBC News says, what is a COVID passport and what are the plans for the NHS app? That's in the UK. Let's have a look what BBC News says about this. What else could a, well, they describe what it is, but you know what a passport, the vaccine passport is. I think everybody in the world knows now. What else could a COVID passport be used for? The government is piloting different ways to run large events in a range of venues across England at the moment, including concerts, nightclubs, and sporting fixtures. Notice, the vaccine passport is not even here yet. And they're actively examining ways to expand its use. It's not even here yet. Folks, the warning bells should be loud enough to be heard across the ocean in your mind. The vaccine passport is not even here. They're looking for ways to use it in other ways already. The purpose of this is control of you, not your health. The people in elected positions of power and unelected positions of power have never had the health and welfare of the people under their control at their interest, in their hearts. They have their own interests at heart, and their interest is that you are controlled while they are free. That's what the elite's interest is, that you are under their control and they are free to do whatever they want. That's how the elite have behaved throughout all of human history, going back thousands upon thousands of years, and they have not changed one bit. It's the same folks, the same mentality, the same drive, the same set of circumstances. It's just more advanced today. And for the first time in history, they know they have an opportunity. They can taste the opportunity to take absolute total control over the entire planet for the first time in history. Let's read on here. Will I need a COVID passport to go to the pub? Why not? A pub is as crowded as an airplane. They'll make that argument. It's an obvious argument. You'll need a COVID passport to do anything. Read on from the top. There will be no legal requirement for a COVID passport when pubs, restaurants reopen to indoor customers on 17th of May. Very careful warning. On the 17th of May there won't, but maybe on the 18th of May there will. They are examining every possible use to control your lives of these passports. However, the government says it will be legal for such businesses to ask customers for proof of COVID status if they wish to, as long as they do not break equality laws. So in other words, your private health records can be demanded of you in order to go in and have a beer with your buddies. If that's not absolute microscopic control of your lives, it is, and it will get worse, fast. What's less clear, reading onward here, is whether the law could change at a later date, meaning businesses are forced to ask customers about their status. You can bet your last dollars those laws will change at a later date, and they're not going to change in your favor. They will always use the pretext of for your safety. Always. I guarantee it. Even as they cut your head off, they'll be telling you it's for your own good and your own safety. What does it take to wake up enough people in this world to say enough is enough? You're not turning me into a work slave prisoner. What will it take? At this point, I don't think there's anything that could wake up some populations, like Canadians. But we do see some positive signs. But when you get down to the overall scheme of it, they're small. The number of people who value their freedom and understand what the importance of freedom is small in our culture. The rest of the people are lemmings. They're going to follow along right off the cliff. There was, though, a couple of protests in Toronto for freedom recently. I applaud the effort. I applaud it, even though I think we have to encourage it. We have to recognize those efforts. But the growth of those efforts has to go exponential, because those seeking to enslave you, they are working very fast. Let's read on. The Prime Minister of the UK, this article is talking about, previously suggested pub goers could be asked to provide proof of vaccination once all adults have been offered a first jab by the end of July. Well, I don't know, folks. That's where it's headed. And here, Healthline. Vaccine passports, what they are and why you may need one soon, April 5th, 2021. All around the media, this vaccine health passports are generally being promoted as a good thing. We need them to get back to a normal life. Crap. If we need a vaccine passport to get back to a normal life, then you're never getting back to a normal life. Normal life never included this kind of intrusion into your privacy and this kind of restriction on your freedoms of motion and freedom to move about in the world. Never. And it shouldn't. Let's read from the top. Countries across the globe have begun announcing vaccine passports allowing the citizens to use proof of vaccination to travel once again. The same. China unveiled its digital passport last month to be accessed via an app. And that's what the UK is considering. That would allow people to verify their vaccination status by scanning a QR code. Japan recently announced plans for a similar digital passport expected to debut in the coming weeks. All of this, folks, keep in mind, the people who travel are generally the younger and healthier groups of people. There's like a 99.997% survival rate of this virus for that group of people. Granted, there are some older and unhealthy people who travel as well. Their survival rate runs, depending on the cohort, from 97% to 99.7%. It's not that hard to identify those at risk and say, you're sick. But ultimately, it's still their decision whether to travel. I could say if we have an active infection, they should be restricted from traveling. But a vaccination, why? If you're not actively affected, you are not going to infect anybody else. And if you're willing to take the risk of an infection, if I want to go into the Amazon where there's all kinds of risks to my life, is there anybody stopping me from doing that? No. I'm free to risk my life. I should be free to risk my life by not taking the vaccine too. There was a tweet came out just recently, I think today, I don't think I screen capped it, but that said that if the vaccine protects those who take the vaccine, why am I not taking the vaccine putting them at risk? If that vaccine protects you, how is me not being vaccinated putting you at risk or anybody at risk? If you want the vaccine, go take the vaccine. I'm all for it. I'm all for people voluntarily making themselves a guinea pig in a science experiment. We've had that going on forever. We've had science experiments taking volunteers with informed consent. Yeah, you got your informed consent about these vaccines. You go and stick it in your arm if you want to. That's freedom. But forcing other people who don't want to stick it in their arm is not freedom. That's tyranny. That is tyranny, and that is what's rising in the world today. It is no accident, no coincidence that it's the lefties who have always been pushing tyranny in one form or another. It is the lefties who want to take a one-world government and enslave the work class. It is the lefties who want to insist that everybody must take a vaccine. That is tyranny. Tyranny is coming from the left in our day, every day, right now, around the world. Let's read on. And here, this fellow, April 12th, 2021, actually says, and he's not alone in this. A lot of people believe this, unfortunately. Vaccine passports the only way out of this pandemic. Maybe he's being paid by Bill Gates, because that's what Bill Gates said before, within weeks of this pandemic starting. Bill Gates lobbied to the tune of $500 million for countries to institute lockdowns around the world. He lobbied to the tune of $500 million. And he's including in his lobbying that we should not open up until everybody's been vaccinated. That's Bill Gates, who, by the way, just happens to stand to become one of the richest men in the world, if he's already one of the richest, but stand to profit handsomely by getting governments to agree to his edict. This is tyranny, folks. It is tyranny, plain, clear, and simple, right in front of our eyes. There's no avoiding that conclusion. Now, that's the political stuff to a degree. Let's get into some of the details here of the treatment and the concerns over the vaccination, because there are other treatments. There are other ways to survive this. And there were other strategies for getting the world to survive this very early on. They were easy, clear to identify, clearly identified, easy to identify strategies that were far superior to any lockdown ideas. Any thinking person, every trained medical person should be able to understand it. You don't lock down the entire population. You let them go about their business getting herd immunity with a 99.997% survival rate, for crying out loud. You should have capitalized that from the beginning, and we talked about that over a year ago. They should have capitalized on that. They didn't. They locked down the people, separating the people who had no risk from this virus, of getting sick from it or dying. That they could have naturally created herd immunity without any vaccine. But they separated them so that it would be delayed and hard and long, if not impossible, until there's a vaccine for Bill Gates to get rich over. We should have been protecting the elderly and those with other illnesses. Full on, full out. We'd have had a herd immunity by now, and the elderly would have been protected because we would have had far more resources and wealth to put towards their protection. But let's read on. Hydroxyquinone and ivermectin. This was printed in April 10th, 2020 in the Journal of American something medicine diagnosis or something like this. I can't remember the name of the journal. I'm going to expand this for you to be able to read it a little bit better. We hypothesize that hydroxychloroquine, I think that's what it is. I always get the thing wrong here, but anyways, and ivermectin may show a consequential and synergistic action if administered simultaneously for both chemoprophylaxis and treatment of COVID-19. Let's read this, because this is just an idea. But to my knowledge, I have not seen any research on this. We've seen independent studies of hydroxychloroquine and independent studies of ivermectin, but we've never seen the two used together. Let's read what these doctors say. Moreover, HCQ could be able to block virus infusion with the host cell through the inhibition of protease activity in cleaving coronavirus surface spike proteins. Okay, that's the theory behind HCQ. Significantly, HCQ contributes to the suppression of the cytokine storm responsible for the disease progression to acute respiratory disease syndrome by several mechanisms. And then ivermectin. Ivermectin acts as a specific inhibitor to important alpha-beta mediated nuclear import. Thus, by impacting on important alpha-beta dependent nuclear transport of viral proteins, ivermectin suppresses the replication of several RNA viruses, including HIV, chikungunya virus, and yellow fever virus. So this is known activities of ivermectin. HCQ is cheap to produce and safe if monitored properly. Ivermectin seems to be safe and well tolerated with no serious drug-related adverse effects. And yes, you remember a week or two ago, one of the concerns against the use of ivermectin by Merck, who couldn't profit by the use of ivermectin, was that its safety wasn't proven. Its safety has been proven for decades. Moreover, reading on, the two drugs do not seem to have a between-drug interaction. So there's no adverse indications of using these two drugs simultaneously, and they have different and helpful mechanisms of action against the coronavirus infection. However, excuse me, no in vitro or in vivo studies have been conducted on the combined effects of HCQ and ivermectin on SARS-CoV-2 infection. Ours is only a hypothesis and a suggestion, but if not now, when should researchers share ideas? Well, like everybody else in the world, only authorized ideas are allowed to be shared and acted upon. This is a brilliant idea. Anyone with any modicum of science understanding could understand if you can attack a disease from two different angles. Its entry into the three angles, actually. With HCQ, its entry into the cells is inhibited, and it inhibits the cytokine storm, which causes the severe respiratory problems, and then ivermectin, which, if the virus gets inside the cells in your lungs, it inhibits the virus from reproducing itself. That 1-2 knockout punch could be very, very, very powerful. And yet, they're putting all this research and money and propaganda into vaccines which have very serious questions about their risks. They are conducting a worldwide, a global research program using all the citizens of the world as guinea pigs when there are these potentially very powerful treatments available. So, let's read on. Here, Dinesh D'Souza quoted, this is going to be, I think, the last one before we get into a slightly different topic on the same lines. Fauci's ducking and weaving under questioning from Rand Paul suggests a startling possibility. The very people who are lecturing us about how to deal with this deadly virus might have been complicit in giving us the virus in the first place. This is with the news that Fauci's organization, I think NIH, was sending quite a lot of money over to that Wuhan lab, specifically to research enhanced functionality of coronaviruses. Now, if you remember, if you're a longtime watcher of the coffee session, we talked about this exact issue a year ago. A year ago. Fauci's connection to Wuhan lab. A lot of people think that I thought I was a conspiracy theorist for that, but his connection to Wuhan lab is very strong. In fact, all of those people who are in the news being charged with conducting the responses to this coronavirus are connected through the World Health Organization, through Wuhan, China, as we talked about. Tedros was put into the head of the World Health Organization by lobbying from the Chinese. Tedros, who's from North Africa, I think it's, what's the country? I can't remember the name of the country right off the top of my head. In any case, I don't want to get too far distracted on that line. We're going to stick to some of the science stuff here today. American Institute for Economic Research says focused protection would have been the right pandemic response. Now, this is interesting to me because this was so frickin' obvious. It didn't take a study. It didn't take a year and a quarter for us to learn this. We knew this from the beginning, but we didn't do it. I shouldn't say we. The elite didn't want that done because that was not in their plan. This is May 11th, 2021. That is a year and 2 months after they started locking us down all the way around the world indiscriminately, even though from the beginning it was well known that the coronavirus specifically attacks older people and people with other illnesses. And we talked about this on this show, and I'm not the only one who've been talking about this, that the coronavirus, that the response to the coronavirus should have been protecting, isolating the elderly and the sick. And I would accept anybody who's so afraid of it that they can isolate themselves too if they want to, even if they're not in the high-risk group. I don't have a problem with that, but we didn't do that. They did a global lockdown and a destruction of the economy, which puts everybody at risk and has a significant risk of enslaving the entire work population of the world. Only the wealthy will escape total slavery. Let's read what they say here. Reading from the top, I'd better expand this for you. I should take a look at some of the comments. Sorry, I don't mean to be ignoring you guys so much here. I just get so wound up into this. Let me take a look at a couple of comments here while we're just take a little pause. Most recent one here. Penrose says, my 93-year-old grandma got it months ago, 0 side effects, super healthy with no issues. Well, that's true. I mean, it is a 90, even in the elderly population, it is a 97% survival rate. Keep that in mind. Even in the at-risk population, the survival rate is 97%. So, And here, Sean Tower, I've seen you around here, Sean, for a while. You're a regular watcher here, if not every show. Sean, thank you so much for your support, Studio Brûlé. Sean says, I was just forced to have my vaccine in New Brunswick as I would have lost my doctor after I was given a brochure. It stated I was always to wear a mask and social distancing at all times. I asked what the purpose of the vac was. This is an excellent question, Sean, and this is terrible. This is terrible that we can't call Canada a free country anymore. I've talked about this before too. It's a police state, clear and simple. Trudeau, like so many other world leaders, but I think Trudeau more than others, took absolute emergency powers with the excuse of this and has turned Canada into a complete police state. It is not freedom when you are refused medical care for not participating in being a guinea pig in a science experiment. That's not freedom, not at all, not in any measure. Let's flip back here to a random question. LGBT. My mom has been in the ER 4 times since her Moderna jab a month ago. She changed her mind and thinks it was the vaccine, but they didn't record any of it as adverse effects. That's right. Here's a good point. From the beginning with this COVID-19, if you died, if there was any indication that you had COVID-19, even symptoms, they were calling the cause of death COVID-19, even a motorcycle accident in Florida. And it's the opposite with the vaccine. Even if the clear side effects, clear adverse effects are due to your getting the vaccine, they are looking for every other excuse and not labeling it as adverse side effects of the vaccine. This is tyranny. This is deceit. This is deliberately putting millions of people's health at risk. And Dream Diction says, they tell us the proof that COVID is real is that asymptomatic people infect other people who also show no symptoms. This is their evidence? As far as I know, I've been reading things, and I can't swear on this, but that this asymptomatic transmission, which I thought was true before, may be wrong. There may be no asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19, but I'm not surprised that they would be pushing the fear of transmission without symptoms. And Michael Keller says, Father's retirement castle is on full lockdown, no visitation. They were all vaccinated in February. Now many are confirmed sick with COVID-19. So that much for the vaccine, excuse me. Terribly sorry there. I'm going to talk about this very shortly. Thanks for bringing this up, Michael. There is evidence, and there's a letter signed by 50-something top doctors sent to the World Health Organization just recently. I'm going to go over some of it shortly. That says that it may be that the vaccine makes people more susceptible to variants of the COVID-19, meaning that you will get weaker and weaker with vaccination. Now we're going to go, they actually talk about some of the science behind this in the article. It's just a little bit dense, but I have a few clips of that letter to go over today, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So let's read this from, the lockdown analysis here. The overwhelming evidence at this point seems to suggest that after controlling for various outliers, most sweeping policy responses like stay-at-home orders and business closures have very little correlation with stopping COVID-19. After factoring in the economic and social damage of lockdown policies, the case for their long-term use becomes untenable. This fact has been hinted at almost since the beginning of the pandemic and increasingly confirmed by the latest data. That we had to wait to confirm this by data is like not accepting that water is wet. How many times do we have to prove that water is wet? How many times do we have to prove that inhaling water causes drowning? We know that. We don't need any more studies, and we knew this at the very beginning of this pandemic. What's going on here is absolutely outrageous. The elite are culpable for murdering millions of people, for destroying lives. There are people, I know of some people who are denied regular scheduled medical treatment that could save their lives, and they died because it was canceled due to coronavirus. All of this falls on the heads of today's elite. They lobbied for it, they got it, they killed people. And now they're conducting the world's largest science experiment on turning regular citizens, by law, forcing them to take vaccines and become guinea pigs. It's outrageous. Hitler would have been proud of their scheming because it's far more devious. Let's read on. In August of 2020, I noted in an analysis here that there seemed to be little correlation between lockdowns around the world and superior performance. Of course not. Some of the strictest countries like Belgium and the UK had some of the worst results. Policies that seemed to work in some countries like Brunei were copied and replicated in other countries like Peru with little success. We didn't need a study to know this. In January of 2021, a study published by Stanford researchers comparing 8 countries that implemented lockdowns with 2 counterfactual that did not concluded the following. In the framework of this analysis, there is no evidence that more restrictive non-pharmaceutical interventions, read lockdowns, contributed substantially to bending the curve of new cases in England, France, Germany, Iran, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, or the United States in early 2020. And yet, Ontario's tyrant, Doug Ford, is implementing new lockdowns every week in Ontario. This has nothing to do with protecting the people. This has everything to do with getting the people accustomed to being work slaves, to the fact that they don't really have freedoms, that the government can lock you in your home anytime they feel like it. Let's read on. Perhaps some of the most insightful data that discredits the necessity and effectiveness of lockdown policies is this report from the Heritage Foundation. In particular, it noted that people in states without lockdowns voluntarily reduced their mobility as COVID-19 cases and deaths spiked. This is why, regardless of lockdowns, COVID cases and deaths seem to follow similar patterns as people voluntarily take measures to slow the spread. Voluntary is fine. When the government gets involved, you lose your freedom. Let's read on. Lockdowns not only artificially reduced activity beyond necessary thresholds, they created undue social as well as economic strife. Mental illness, violence, increased drug use and alcohol use, death, the canceling of needed surgeries. The list goes on and on. Children displaying all kinds of behavioral problems and psychological problems because they, in a critical phase of their lives, are denied normal social mixing, even though they have zero. I will say it again, it is zero, not 0.001% risk. They have zero risk from this coronavirus. They have a greater risk of being hit by a meteor from the sky outside than they do of dying from the coronavirus. And yet, these tyrants that have taken power under the guise of an emergency, they're tyrants. Yet they are punishing everyone. Read from the top. In an article here, Jack Nicastro and I explored how, despite the historic association of recessions and pandemics, lockdowns made the COVID-19 downturn much worse. Well, that's no surprise. When you force businesses to shut down, the economy suffers. You don't need a study for that either. You don't need a study to say when people lose their means of surviving, their income, that their health and their lives and their psychology, their psychological state is going to suffer. You know that ahead of time, or you're just too dumb to walk about in our world. Let's read from the top. Experience has shown that communities faced with epidemics or other adverse events respond best and with least anxiety when the normal social functioning of the community is least disrupted. I've heard that all my life, and this is absolutely true. There was no need for this worldwide lockdown. Zero. Absolute zero. The elite knew it from the beginning. But they wanted a lockdown. Amazon's Bezos' wealth has doubled and more. The profit of these big tech companies has gone through the roof. Bill Gates stands to gain billions upon billions from his vaccine and other investments. I've told you this before. All of those guys have invested heavily in African countries, and one of the things that the World Economic Forum is insisting upon in the Great Reset is that the West transfers wealth to the poor countries of the world in Africa. And the wealthy of the world, the Bill Gateses, the Jeff Bezos, and more, have already invested, created their companies in those countries to receive those wealth transfers. Your tax dollars are going directly to Bezos and Gates under the guise of the third world. This is just complicated money laundering. Let's read on. Reading from the top. Building on this idea, and in the face of growing evidence, the idea of focused protection was famously articulated by the Great Barrington Declaration in October 2020. Although it is up to interpretation as to what that means in specific contexts. It largely advocates the light-handed policies rather than lockdowns. It advocates for the majority of society to practice voluntary decision-making while taking important steps to shield vulnerable populations. If I can think about that in the first 2 weeks of this, you know darn well that the world leaders can think about that, and they know it. They are guilty of deliberately harming people's lives all the way around the world. They deliberately, in my opinion, they wanted forced vaccination. Now you can speculate on the reasons why they wanted it. There could be many, multiple reasons. But they did not have your best interest at heart from the beginning. And they don't today, and they never will. Let's read on from the top. The efficacy of this approach in hindsight, come on. We cannot possibly have that many dumb people at every level of our society. In hindsight. You got to seriously convince me that you can write these articles and you can be an expert in whatever field you're in and you didn't realize this from day one? If you didn't, you're stupid. If you did, you're lying and deceiving us. In hindsight is demonstrated by the mobility data comparison mentioned above and the performance of states like Florida and Texas, among others, that have ended most, if not all, of their lockdown policies. More importantly, it appears that success in protecting vulnerable populations such as nursing homes rather than implementing lockdowns explains far more about why certain states had more deaths than others. Of course, it was clearly obvious to anybody who had their eyes open and even a small amount of knowledge about viruses and sickness and health and economy. Reading from the top. Although nursing home residents comprise about 1% of the U.S. population, they make up about 40% of all COVID deaths. 40%. And yet they lock down the healthy people and destroy the economies around the world. Something of that scale needs an explanation, and the explanation is definitely not to protect the people of the world. In Sweden, that number is 50%. This information points us in a direction that suggests that minimizing COVID deaths is not about closing schools and businesses, but ensuring that nursing homes are protected. If I knew about that in the first 2 weeks, you know these people knew about that. These lockdowns were never about protecting the people. They wanted to destroy the economy. They wanted to force the vaccination around the world. Everyone should be getting furious about this. Everyone. Florida is perhaps one of the best examples in the U.S. of a state that took steps to shield nursing home patients, which resulted in relatively low deaths compared with the rest of the country, despite having one of the oldest populations. Again, it's great that you got this like after the fact information, but we didn't need it. We knew this. Everybody should have known this. It was frickin' obvious. Let's read on. Okay, this is the next segment here of the doctors, 57 top scientists and doctors who are encouraging or lobbying to stop this corona vaccines from being pushed on people. They want it stopped, and they've got some very good reasons for stopping it. Let me pause here for a second. I'll just get a couple of the most recent comments up here. Michael Keller says to Sean Tower, if you want to invest in some put options. Crash imminent? Possibly. I don't really know about that. Anthony Williams says, doctors, especially ER, treat older people much worse. They're going to die soon anyway, so they don't care. That's actually quite true. And thank you for pointing that out. These care communities, they call themselves the care professionals. They often do not have anything but your best interests at heart. They need to be watched very carefully. And Sean says, did anyone hear the conspiracy theory of Bill Gates using excuse of divorce to completely divest himself of all stock markets? Well, I haven't heard that one. So let me carry on with the next section here. 57 top scientists. You're going to find this interesting, folks. And doctors release shocking study on COVID vaccines and demand immediate stop to all vaccinations. 8 days ago this came out. That's about the first week of May. Let's read on. Reading from top. I better expand this for you. There are two certainties regarding the global distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. The first is that governments and vast majority of the mainstream media are pushing with all their might to get these experimental drugs into as many people as possible. The second is that those who are willing to face the scorn that comes with asking serious questions about vaccines are critical players in our ongoing effort to spread the truth. I can't agree more. Why is there so much effort to ramrod vaccines around the world? This is the biggest medical experiment on innocent, non-consenting people in the history of humanity. They are setting records here. And the rich have all the resources to coerce people around the world to accept this experimental vaccine as guinea pigs. And not to pat myself on the back, but I say everybody should turn themselves into a critical player in spreading the truth. Everybody. You're going to be called a conspiracy theorist. That's just a fact of life. Because the majority of people in our culture and other cultures around the world, they are sheep. They're lemmings. They're just going to accept what the authorities say no matter what. They will never assess the validity of what's coming from the authorities. Even if it's as clear as day, even as clear as day like in the lockdowns. From the beginning, lockdowns were never required. Protect the elderly and the vulnerable. That was required. We didn't do that. We did the opposite by locking everybody down, destroying the economy. That should be evidence enough that you should not trust the elite leaders. They are tyrants. They have grasped emergency powers unjustly. They are tyrants. Everyone. It's time for everybody to take the risk of speaking the truth as you see it. Now, it's true, some people legitimately, some people honestly believe that these vaccines are the only way out of this pandemic. In my mind, they're brainwashed. They're brainwashed. It is not. It has never been the only way out of this pandemic. But speak your mind. Let's read from the top here. I'll expand this for you. There are still far too many unanswered questions regarding COVID-19 vaccine safety, efficacy, and necessity. This study is a bombshell that should be heard by everyone regardless of their views on vaccines. There aren't nearly enough citizens who are asking questions. Most people simply follow the orders of world governments as if they have earned our complete trust. They have not done so. This is very important. They have lied to us repeatedly, and not just in this pandemic. Leaders in positions of power have lied to their subjects non-stop throughout history. Why do we still have large groups of people believing them? This is craziness. This manuscript, I'm reading onward now, is a step forward in terms of accountability and the free flow of information on this crucial subject. Please take time to read it and share it widely. This is the part of the preamble, these last bits I've been reading, to the letter, manuscript sent by the doctors, the 57 doctors, demanding that they stop forcing these vaccines on people. So let's read on. This is a quick display of some of the people who have signed this letter. Read from the top again. SARS-CoV-2 mass vaccination. Urgent questions on vaccine safety that demand answers from international health agencies, regulatory authorities, governments, and vaccine developers. They want these answers. They want these answers from those people who are ramrodding these experimental drugs onto unsuspecting people, people who trust in them, people who have a inordinate, naive trust in authority are the first ones to rush towards these vaccines. They believe their lives are at risk. They are told that they can't go about their ordinary lives unless they take this experimental drug. You're being duped. Let's read from the top here. I'll expand this out for you. Just before I do, I just want to acknowledge Higgledy-Piggledy. Thank you so much for your support of Studio Brûlé. And I'll get right back to the material at hand here. Expand this up for you. Since COVID-19, this is the letter from the doctors now. Since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic in March 2020, over 150 million cases and 3 million deaths have been reported worldwide. Despite progress on early ambulatory multi-drug therapy for high-risk patients, resulting in 85% reduction in COVID-19 hospitalization and death, the current paradigm for control is mass vaccination. Mass vaccination. While we recognize the effort involved in development, production, and emergency authorization of SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, we are concerned that risks have been minimized or ignored by health organizations and government authorities, despite calls for caution. Not everybody is silent on this, which is why the other indicated that we need people to speak the truth. Those people who have spoken out about this have been marginalized. They've been threatened with the loss of their jobs, like 2 California doctors were. They've been threatened in every conceivable way. They've been deplatformed for criticizing the official line. And Twitter, I think it was Twitter or Facebook, one of them, or both, came out and said that they will block anything that contradicts the official line from CDC and the World Health Organization, both of which have been demonstrated to have been lying to us and manipulating us. So that's where we're at. Let's read on here. Vaccines for other coronaviruses have never been approved for humans, and data generated in the development of coronavirus vaccines designed to elicit neutralizing antibodies show that they may worsen COVID-19 disease via antibody-dependent enhancement, ADE. This is an actual real effect. Antibody-dependent enhancement. Data generated by the development of COVID vaccines, I'm rereading this because it's so important, designed to elicit neutralizing antibodies show that they may worsen COVID-19 disease. Now, someone recently said that their grandmother or their mother was in the hospital and 4 times since getting the vaccine. And yet they're not identifying this as a side effect of the vaccine. They're calling it allergies and stuff. This is the trickiness of these people. They're tricking us. The Th2 immunopathology, regardless of the vaccine platform and delivery method. Vaccine-driven disease enhancement in animals vaccinated against SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV is known to occur following viral challenge and has been attributed to immune complexes and Fc-mediated viral capture by macrophages which augment T-cell activation and inflammation. So, they're just giving you some details there on previously demonstrated vaccine-driven disease enhancement. In other words, getting the vaccine could make your response to getting coronavirus worse. Getting the vaccine could make you sick. I think they're referring to small variants that make you even more susceptible to variants of the COVID-19. Now, remember this acronym here, serious adverse effects. Read on from the top. Given that the follow-up of volunteers did not exceed 2 to 3.5 months after the second dose in the receiving vaccines, it is unlikely that such serious adverse effects would have been observed. Despite errors in reporting, it cannot be ignored that even accounting for the number of vaccines administered, according to the U.S. Vaccine Adverse Effect Reporting System, the number of deaths per million vaccine doses administered has increased more than 10-fold, and that's taking into account the increased number of doses. 10-fold. We believe there is an urgent need for open scientific dialogue on vaccine safety in the context of large-scale immunization. Let's read onwards. From the top with me, if you will. With few exceptions, SARS-CoV-2 vaccine trials excluded the elderly, the most at-risk population, making it impossible to identify the occurrence of post-vaccination eosinophilia and enhanced inflammation in elderly people. Studies of SARS-CoV vaccines show that the immunized elderly mice were at particularly high risk of life-threatening Th2 immunopathology. Despite this evidence and the extremely limited data on safety and efficacy of SARS-CoV-2 vaccines in the elderly, mass vaccination campaigns have focused on this age group from the start. So, don't test it on the elderly, but give it to the elderly. You can't make this stuff up, folks. You can't make this stuff up. Remember this acronym, antibody-dependent enhancement. Antibody-dependent enhancement. Reading from the top with me. COVID-19 encompasses a wide clinical spectrum, ranging from very mild to severe pulmonary pathology and fatal multi-organ disease with inflammatory, cardiovascular, and blood coagulation dysregulation. In this sense, cases of vaccine-related ADE or immunopathology would be clinically indistinguishable from severe COVID-19. In other words, There's no way at this point to distinguish between severe COVID-19 and a response to the vaccine. And they're not studied this. You could have a case of vaccine-related ADE, and it would be clinically indistinguishable from COVID-19. Let's read on. Furthermore, even in the absence of SARS-CoV-2 virus, spike glycoprotein alone causes endothelial damage and hypertension in vitro and in vivo in Syrian hamsters by downregulating this other particular enzyme and impairing mitochondrial function. Although these findings need to be confirmed in humans, the implications of this finding are staggering, as all vaccines authorized for emergency use are based on the delivery or induction of spike glycoprotein synthesis. All. And it causes hypertension, endothelial damage in animal studies. And yet, this is being distributed, turning all these people into guinea pigs. In the case, reading from the top of me, in the case of mRNA vaccines and adenovirus vectorized vaccines, not a single study has examined the duration of spike production in humans following vaccination. Not a single study. Under the cautionary principle, it is parsimonious to consider vaccine-induced spike synthesis could cause clinical signs of severe COVID-19 and erroneously be counted as new cases of SARS-CoV-2 infections. In other words, prepare to see adverse responses to the vaccine being registered as a severe COVID-19 response, infection. Thus, further artificially pumping the numbers and therefore giving them more ammunition to put even more vaccines out in a kind of viciously destructive cycle. If so, the true adverse effects of the current global vaccination strategy may never be recognized unless studies specifically examine this question. And yet, there are no studies even planned. You, me, we are the guinea pigs. Reading from the top. There is already non-causal evidence of temporary or sustained increases in COVID-19 deaths following vaccination in some countries. And in light of spikes' pathogenicity, these deaths must be studied in depth to determine whether they are related to vaccination. And this is what one of you in the comments was saying earlier. People are getting sick from this vaccine, and they're not studying it. In fact, if anything, they're in full denial of this. Reading from the top. Another critical issue to consider given the global scale of SARS-CoV-19 vaccination is autoimmunity. SARS-CoV-2 has numerous immunogenic proteins, and all but one of its immunogenic epitopes have similarities to human proteins. These may act as a source of antigens, leading to autoimmunity. I think that's what they mean, is an autoimmune disorder. In other words, the virus itself has something like, what do they say, 19 different proteins that are similar to human proteins. So being vaccinated for that particular virus can lead to an autoimmune disorder. Reading onwards. While it is true that the same effects could be observed during natural infection with SARS-CoV-2, vaccination is intended for most of the world population. While it is estimated that only 10% of the world population has been infected with SARS-CoV-2, according to Dr. Michael Ryan, head of emergencies at the World Health Organization. So let's put this in perspective here. Yes, you can get an autoimmune disorder from getting the actual coronavirus, but that's only 10% of the population. They are trying to vaccinate the whole world with a vaccine that could cause the similar autoimmune disorder, and it hasn't been tested for. They are not even scheduling to test this. They are using every one of us as guinea pigs. Let's read on. We have been unable to find evidence that any of the currently authorized vaccines screened and excluded homologous immunogenic epitopes to avoid potential autoimmunity due to pathogenic priming. Not one vaccine has been even screened for this. You are the guinea pigs. We all. Read on. But if future variants were to differ more in key epitopes, the global vaccination strategy might have helped shape an even more dangerous virus. The risk has recently been brought to the attention of the WHO as an open letter. Future variants were to differ in key epitopes, the vaccination strategy might have helped an even more dangerous virus. Reading up from the top. Of particular concern is the planned vaccination schedule for children aged 6 and older in the United States and in the UK. Dr. Anthony Fauci recently anticipated that teenagers across the country will be vaccinated in the autumn and younger children in early 2022. And the UK is awaiting trial results to commence vaccination of 11 million children under 18. These people have absolutely zero to risk from the coronavirus, and yet they're going to be included as guinea pigs. This really is outrageous, folks. Parents should be jumping and screaming against this. These children have a 99.997, maybe more, % survival rate. Even children with other illnesses have that kind of level of survival rate. And yet they're going to turn your child into a guinea pig. Let's read on. There is a lack of scientific justification for subjecting healthy children to experimental vaccines, given that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that they have a 99.997% survival rate if infected with SARS-CoV. Not only is COVID-19 irrelevant as a threat to this age group, but there is no reliable evidence to support vaccine efficacy or effectiveness in this population or to rule out harmful side effects of these experimental vaccines. Remember that the vaccine itself may cause autoimmune disorder because it is the virus and the vaccine targets 19 proteins that are shared in common with human beings. And yet, they want to take all the healthy young children and stick them with a vaccine that could ruin their health. This is incredible. And what's also incredible is just how few people are speaking up and getting outraged about this. This has been an eye-opener to how many lemmings and sheep there are among us. Incredible. Let's read on here. In the context of these concerns, we propose halting mass vaccination and opening an urgent, pluralistic, critical, scientifically based dialogue on SARS-CoV, vaccination among scientists, medical doctors, international health agencies, regulatory authorities, governments, and vaccine developers. It's a little overdue, but I applaud them for getting to it. Yes, you should halt this immediately. Now, this is the tweet, one of the tweets that got me thinking along these lines from Tommy Pirolsky, the evil patriarchist. Well, we've come to expect that those who identify as a patriarch, those who resist the evil feminist global empire, to be the only ones, or the few, among the few who speak reason in the world here. And true to form, this fact is indisputable. This, as Tommy Pirolsky says, the evil patriarchist, is an indisputable fact. Not wanting to get a particular vaccine does not make you an anti-vaxxer. There is extremely strong reasons to reject this vaccine. Extremely strong. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've taken vaccines many times in my life. I've taken flu vaccines. I've been vaccinated against polio and all the standard stuff that kids get vaccinated, and it doesn't bother me one bit. But this is different. These vaccinations, there's a motive, an ulterior motive behind this one. There was a better way to treat this pandemic. We talked about it. And anybody who had any modicum of knowledge on how these kinds of infections work could have predicted this from day one, that we didn't need lockdowns. And yet, we had the lockdowns. And yet we had the elite lobbying for lockdowns to destroy the economies, lobbying for that the lockdowns would not end until everybody's vaccinated, and lobbying to put these experimental vaccines into billions of people, untested, with serious questions about their safety, unanswered, and yet they did it. Those are the tyrants that are running our world. They're the psychopathic, megalomaniacal tyrants that are in control and power in our world, and they want more power. If only there were more of us willing to speak out against this, and those who can protest. I applaud them. In Toronto, they're doing it. There have been protests in Montreal. I think that many states are actually, legislators in the U.S. are actually legislating against this. One state legislated, I think recently, that they would not have mandatory vaccine passports. But we need that all around the world. We need some common sense back into our cultures. And we need some backbone to fight for your freedoms and maintain them before they're gone. And when they're gone, they don't come back easily. They come back with, yet again, another river of blood only. Let's move onward here. And this, I think, David Hogg, you will all remember from one of the school shootings, who became a instant national celebrity in the U.S. and anti-gun advocate and general idiot. David Hogg, his tweets in this manner caught my attention because they capture the essence of leftism, the essence of collectivism, the essence of the fear, the fearfulness, and the lack of freedom at the core of all leftist collectivism. David Hogg says, "I feel the need to continue wearing my mask outside even though I'm fully vaccinated, because the inconvenience of having to wear a mask is more than worth it to have people not think I'm a conservative." That is fear. And collectivism always is full of fear, because collectivists put everything in the collective. Everything. Let's read on to the next tweet that he followed this up with. Rejection from the collective is the fear that they have. They don't want to be seen as the other. This is the opposite of conservatism, by the way, which is very individual related. And societies, by the way, I've heard this argued against many times, but the root building block of culture and society is not any group, not even the family. The root building block of a culture is the individual. It all starts with the individual. The individual is more fundamental than the family or any other unit, the individual. And conservatives fight for individual rights. Liberals are the opposite. They always lobby for the reduction of individual rights and the increase, strengthening of collectivism. But without this, the demand for individual rights, the fighting for individual rights, you cannot live without fear. When you live among people who recognize and protect your individual rights, you live among people who you can trust, because you don't have to fear that they're taking away your individual rights. They fight for protection of your individual rights. That's what conservatism does. And what collectivism, in order to push collectivism forward, they must attack individual rights. Individual rights are in conflict with collectivism. Let's read on with the next tweet from David Hogg. I feel like this is something you can especially understand if you are in a very liberal area where 99% of the people you see are wearing masks. He's admitting it right there. The obvious is that it is in these liberal, quote, liberal areas. Liberal has nothing to do with individual rights. Liberal today is not even liberal. This is collectivism. If you have to especially fear of being outed for not believing the collective belief in your community, then you are living in fear, and you are not living in freedom. You are self-limiting your freedoms, because you know that you are at risk from your own people. Conservatives don't have that fear. Conservatives stand up for the individual rights and freedoms of individuals. That means you. Even you, David Hogg. Conservatives stand for the principle, and conservatives understand that it is the individual whose rights need to be protected, not the collective. Collectives don't need rights. Individuals need rights and freedoms. Let's read my response here. I responded to David Hogg on this from the top. This is emblematic of the fear and tyranny inherent in leftism. Not even the most woke of the woke is safe, and you can never be woke enough to relax and enjoy life as a normal human being. Leftism is all-consuming and will even consume every leftist. The collective is everything. And that's what it is for collectivists. The collectivist is everything. As an individual, you don't have rights in the purest sense, of collectivism. That's why it is collectivism that is contributing the majority of the political evil in the world and the destruction of individuals and individual rights and freedoms. And I think that's all I have for today, folks. So it went on a lot longer than I thought. I thought this would be a short one, but I kind of got into it and get worked up on this theme, especially of freedoms and rights, because they are being thrown away. It's as if people don't realize how hard, how long it took for human culture to recognize individual rights and freedoms. There were rivers of blood were spent doing this, and they're under attack today. Under attack even on the flimsy excuse of a coronavirus. Your safety, even your safety, is not as important as your freedom and your liberty. So with that, I'll say goodbye for today. Thank you so much again for joining me on Studio Brûlée, Coffee with Steve. And as I like to say at the end of every session, do something you love today, do something you love to do. If you don't have something you love to do, find something you love to do and do it every single day. This is your life. You don't get to replay it. You don't get to take back any day, any hour, any minute. Do something you love to do today and every day. And until next time, I'll see you, and take care, and I'll see you again next time on Coffee with Steve.